gotten back into Musha.
Really, on the Genesis?
On the Genesis.
It's an excellent game.
I never had it when I was a kid, and I think you and I played it at one point, and I liked it. And then I saw it again online somewhere, and I bought it off eBay, a year or two ago, and just started playing it. And I mean, it just blows me away again at how great that game is.
Yeah, Musha is one of those games that really stands the test of time.
I love shooters.
It's just challenging. The graphics are really, really good. The design was great. All the parallax scrolling that they did, and
really clever.
The one scene that stands out in my mind is when I think it's at the beginning of a level where you're flying over these tiles and everything just starts to fall into this canyon.
Yeah, that falls into the lava canyon.
Right, that falls down below you. And I just remember, because the Genesis didn't have, I think they called it scaling, where Super Nintendo had the Mode 7 scaling, where you could have something zoom in and out, where it was relatively smooth. The Genesis, they had to do it by actually drawing the separate things, falling into the abyss. And I just remember being very impressed. I mean, things have changed so much now. Obviously, it's ridiculous to hear things like this, but to see all the parallax scrolling and the dimension that game brought out, it's just a phenomenal game. It just sticks out in my memory as one of my favorites.
And the music was really good in that one.
Yeah, that's right.
I love, because I know you and I had always talked about how, I think, because we're both in our early 30s now, and when we grew up, the Genesis was the hot system, especially when we were in high school.
Absolutely.
So that's I know you and I had always talked about that being one of our favorites, and I've actually sat down and I still have my original Genesis, and in fact I had it modified with an S-video cable for use on a high definition television now, so you can actually, not that it's in HD, but actually see what the games look like with a bit more clarity and color contrast and the saturation. And Revenge of Shinobi, one I've actually played again recently. Really enjoy that one. I remember playing that one when I was in 8th or 9th grade or something. Herzog's Y, always one of my favorites.
I got to say, my first games I remember getting for the Genesis were, I think it was Altered Beast, because it was packed in with the system, and I think it was Revenge of Shinobi was the game I bought along with it.
Yeah.
And those games just took up tons and tons of hours of my life. It was absolutely fantastic.
That would have been back in 1989.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a long time ago.
It's about 20 years ago now, Dave.
I know. My first game system that I ever had, well, I guess technically it was a computer, but I had the Commodore 64. That's really where my gaming life kind of started.
I never had one.
Yeah, the Commodore 64 was good. You could have, it was a simple interface. I haven't used it in so long.
What was it? It was 64 kilobytes of RAM, wasn't it?
That's probably what it was. I honestly, I don't know where the name came from, Commodore 64, but you're probably right. I mean, it was probably very small, something very, very small like that.
I never had that one. My first system was the Atari 2600. Not this exact one here in front of me, but one very similar to it. And that's what I got started on. So
that's a good choice. That is a good choice. So I enjoyed the Atari when I went over to my cousin's house, because my cousin's in St. Louis when I lived there when I was a kid. They had the Atari, and I would go over there and I'd play Adventure, Berserk, Pac-Man, the horrible version of Pac-Man.
Yeah, that original one sucked. That was god-awful. That
was the worst version of Pac-Man I've ever seen. My cell phone does a better Pac-Man now. It's ridiculous. But, yeah, I mean, my first console that I ever had was actually the Sega Master System. Because
my buddy had that one. I never had one.
That was decent, because I remember one Christmas, I was a kid, I was looking to get something. I really wanted the Nintendo Entertainment Center, but I think it was too expensive at the time. And the Sega Master System, it bombed over here miserably.
Yeah, no one
I wasn't really aware of it. I wasn't really aware that it had bombed, but I guess it had, because it must have been in some bargain bin somewhere, because I opened up Christmas morning, I opened up a box, and sure enough, it's a Sega Master System, and I literally got about 20 games. And
it's a nice Christmas.
It was over. It was over from then on out. That's really when my absolute love for video games kicked in, because I had just a library from day one of these games, and I played the hell out of them.
You were always a big you definitely knew more about Sega than I did, and because I was more on the Atari tip, because I grew up with Atari, and you grew up with the with the Sega, so you knew about Space Harrier, and there was Panzer Panzer Dragoon or something? Wasn't that one?
Panzer Dragoon. That was a Saturn game. Yeah, I mean, considering that was my first console, I have to say I was sort of a Sega fanboy for a while. Because they were, I had such strong memories attached to it that I think that's really where a lot of the fanboyism comes from. Is that these kids, they grow up playing the game system and they have all these memories attached to them, and they don't want to let that go.
So there's going to be a generation of Halo 3 fanboys now.
Yeah, there's going to be a generation of Microsoft fanboys. I mean, there kind of have been already, but they're going to be Xbox fanboys, and they're out there. They're everywhere. And then there's PlayStation fanboys, of course, and Nintendo fanboys, and at some point we're all just going to have to learn to love each other.
Can't we all get along, Dave?
Exactly.
Well, I think that you and I have always been Sega Genesis fans. That's for sure. Yeah, that really sort of goes beyond being a Sega fanboy. I mean, the Genesis was just... It was unique at the time. I don't think people today... to me at least, I have a hard time imagining how a kid today could look at the Sega Genesis and say, why would you find anything stand out about the Genesis compared to the NES or compared to the Super Nintendo? But there was something unique about the Genesis. It's hard to put your finger on it, but I think it had a lot to do with the style of the games that came out for that system. The style of the games, and they had a genius marketing campaign. I mean, the Sega Scream was, just one of those things that sticks out in your memory as one of the great video game campaigns. And it's so sad that they lost that. They completely lost that identity. And, I think that's, obviously what, part of the downfall of Sega as a hardware company is that they lost focus on, on really sort of how to reach out to people, who their audience was, and the kind of things that they would want to watch. I mean, those ads were funny with, what's that guy's name? Ethan, I can't remember the actor's name anymore, but the guy who's in Mallrats, the guy who beat his head with the dead squirrel in that commercial.
Golden days of video games, when everybody used to play games on this little black box here called the Genesis. Now, if all you little kids out there don't know what a Genesis is, you're going to hell.